So despite the Liberals, the NDP, and the Bloc's relentless attacks on our community, I will assure them that we will never, and I mean never, stop fighting against what they're doing to millions of Canadians who haven't done a thing to deserve it. We're here today to talk about the Liberals' disastrous policies and their atrocious behavior concerning licensed firearm owners. The CCFR represents many of the 2.3 million licensed gun owners in Canada. That includes over 640,000 Canadians who are licensed to own handguns. It's not a small community either by any measure. It's a community that is uniquely responsible and law-abiding. And it's a community under attack like no other by no fault of their own. Firearm owners in Canada pass mandatory safety training through the RCMP Canadian Firearms Program. They are extensively vetted by the RCMP. They are vetted every 24 hours thereafter through a program called Continuous Eligibility Screening. And concealable firearms like handguns are registered so the government knows where they are and who has them. This is only a small sampling of the regulation that responsible gun owners comply with in order to be trusted with firearms. The Liberal NDP government has been on full attack against exclusively this community of people for the past 7 years and with unprecedented intensity for the past 3 years. The average non-gun owning Canadian could be forgiven for not knowing if this relentless, divisive attack on our community is making Canada safer, no matter how morally reprehensible it is. But the results are in, and they are not difficult to understand.
Over the last 7 years, crime and violence has skyrocketed under the Liberal NDP government, all while the Liberals increased gun control on unlicensed gun owners, and while they were at it, made life the easiest it's ever been on criminals. The Liberals have rolled out 3 gun bans in 3 years, while gang-related homicide has shot up 92%, basically doubled, along with a 32% rise in violent crime, all since the Liberals took office. Those same gun-owning Canadians need to ask what in the world is going on. The Liberals spent the first 3 years of their majority government pontificating about how government has no business classifying firearms and that it should be left to the experts at the RCMP lab. Then they engaged in precisely that behavior at a level we've never seen before in the history of our country, and take a good hard look at the mess that they've created. On top of that, they've yet again circumvented democracy and the usual parliamentary process by sneaking in Amendment G4 into C-21, this late in the committee stage. After 2 votes in the House of Commons, after deliberation at CCFR, after all the expert witnesses testified, and after hearing from Indigenous leaders, nobody got to speak to this sweeping hunting gun ban amendment. This is a mockery of our legislative system and does nothing for public safety. Canada is a far more dangerous place to live, and we are more divided than ever. The Liberals and their enablers, the NDP and, of course, the Bloc, can credit themselves for this massive failure at keeping Canadians safe. And I will mention, not only making Canadians far less safe than ever in a modern Canada and wasting billions in tax resources, this coalition feels it virtuous to lay this disaster at the feet of licensed gun owners who are productive, law-abiding contributors to Canadian society since long before Confederation. So I would ask, what exactly have we done to deserve this? And how is this going to make Canada better? I'd ask all Canadians to dedicate a few minutes today to think about this.
I also want to mention that the Liberal NDP Bloc Alliance has put an amazing amount of effort into convincing non-gun owning Canadians that legal firearm ownership means increasing violent crime with firearms, and nothing could be further from the truth. In the recent past, we have had far less rules around firearms and a safer Canada, so how is that at all possible? If what they're saying is true, I ask you. The period that I'm talking about is about a year before the Liberals first came into power in 2015. Anyone can look up that information. It's very easy to find. So despite the Liberals, the NDP, and the Bloc's relentless attacks on our community, I will assure them that we will never, and I mean never, stop fighting against what they're doing to millions of Canadians who haven't done a thing to deserve it. So I'd like to thank you for your attention. Be happy to answer any of your questions.
And we'll start with questions in the room. Nous allons commencer avec des questions dans la salle. Si vous êtes en ligne et vous désirez poser une question, utilisez la fonction lever la main. If you're online and want to ask a question, please use the raise hand function.
Morning. The bill and the amendments tabled recently focus on much what the 2020 Order in Council ban did. That included a ban on guns like the Ruger Mini 14, AR-15 and its variants. Should those types of guns not be banned?
Appreciate that. So firearm owners in Canada are licensed, as I mentioned. They go through a lot of screening. They go through screening every 24 hours. And if you look at, I think the real question that Canadians have to ask and ask their government is, do licensed firearm owners represent a disproportionate risk to safety? Do they commit crimes? If so, what are those crimes and how often? Like that's important data in which to determine whether or not Canadians can own guns, including the ones you mentioned. But the government isn't forthcoming with any information like that. So it just screams that it's ideological. And we're what we consider to be the reasonable gun lobby. Have there been licensed gun owners, a handful of them in the history of Canada, that have done terrible things? Absolutely. Is it a significant portion in if you look at total crimes? It isn't statistically significant. So have they? Absolutely. And we're ready to admit that. And there are a few loopholes, I think, in the licensing system that can be addressed, but not a whole lot. So Canada is a very safe place to live, but the answer to firearm-related violence isn't to take guns away from everybody that hasn't done anything. It's not a case of this is why we can't have nice things. It's just not a way to operate government. And that's just my opinion.
There's been a lot of talk that this is the biggest attack on hunting rifles and shotguns in Canada in its history. Can you name 3, 4, 5 from the list that's been tabled at committee that you feel are routine, run-of-the-mill hunting rifles and shotguns that should be nowhere near that list?
Yeah, I can give you a couple examples for sure. So there's two different parts to that list. There's the schedule, which is actually a list, and then there's the amendment itself, G4, which is a phrase that encompasses a whole bunch of more guns that aren't actually named. The list itself is to capture more that wouldn't be captured in that phrase, if that makes sense. I'll give you an example. So the Ruger number 1 is mentioned in there. And of course, in committee, the Liberal MPs are saying that only applies to models that are able to produce 10,000 joules or more. The problem is a very quick barrel change on that gun produces more than 10,000 joules. So you've got a single shot rifle that is commonly used in Canada and has been for well over 100 years being banned, assuming it's some kind of something else. I don't know if it was intentional to capture them or not, but they're absolutely captured. The key is capable of, and that's the language. Another example is a Browning bar. I own one. It's in a caliber of .270, perfect deer hunting caliber. I've used it for well over 25 years, and my intention was always to pass it on to my children. It came to me brand new from Cabela's store here in Ottawa, and it came with 5-round mag, not a pinned mag. That's capable of accepting more. But like most guns, it was designed and manufactured in a different country. It was designed in the U.S. And in the U.S., you can get a 7 or 10-round mag for it. So therefore, because it's capable of accepting those mags, even though I can't legally get one here in Canada, it's now banned. So this captures pretty much everything I own personally, and I have a pretty vast collection. But those are just some examples. There's a Weatherby Mark V on there. Again, they're saying, well, maybe it's only the larger calibers. If they meant that it was only certain calibers, they should have named them. The problem is they've named it by make and model, and that encapsulates everything in that model of gun.
The Weatherby Mark V is a bolt-action rifle, okay? And then in the regulation or in the amendment, they talk about variants. So basically, when you consider bolt-action rifles, they're the I guess the second simplest firearm in existence, other than break action, hinge action. You know, the ones that break apart like that. So if you say the Weatherby Mark V is prohibited, plus any variants that means all bolt-action rifles can be prohibited at any time well, again, a lot of times for no reason at all. Going forward in the future, the RCMP Firearms Laboratory can say, well, this Remington 700 hunting rifle is identical to the Weatherby Mark V. So thus, it's a variant. It's now banned too, no matter what caliber it is. This is some of the worst. This is disastrous legislation. So hopefully that answers your question.
Hi there, Marie Vastel from Le Devoir. I think we've all spoken before. The minister says in response to your position on the fact that this has been tabled late and it's very vast, the minister says that he always planned to introduce what he calls evergreen classification system, and that many of these arms were already restreint in French.
Already banned.
Banned. What do you answer to that? That it was always his intention, and essentially, I guess you should have seen it coming.
Well, we've definitely seen all of this coming because we've said all along their plan is to ban all firearms from civilian ownership in Canada. And it's wrong now and it's wrong then. And yeah, we saw it coming and we were criticized for saying it's coming. So here we are with numerous hunting firearms, not even used for sport shooting, hunting only, being banned just as everyone predicted. So and of course named variants. So basically they've opened the door to ban everything.
But is it legitimate if they did say it was coming for them to table it at this point, I guess? And my second question, did you consult with the Bloc or the NDP? I know that you've qualified them as being part of a coalition government, but those parties have also had divisions within their own caucuses over time over gun legislation. So have you consulted with them? Because there does need to be a majority to have G46, for example, the list pass, or G4.
Well, those parties vote with the Liberals, and you will see them vote for C-21. They may or may not try to pull a political move by disagreeing with the amendment, but at the end, they will vote for C-21, as they voted for every single other piece of firearm-related legislation that the Liberals have brought forward in the past 7 years. Yeah, and if this was a legitimate process, then Mr. Mendicino should have put it in the legislation to begin with so that the parliamentary process could have actually taken place. We could have commented, we could have talked about this, they could have answered questions on it, but they did a late stage amendment for a reason. They didn't want it to go through the process.
Hi, my name is Mylène Crête from La Presse. So what do you want? Do you want the government to remove this amendment, or I'm not clear on that?
Why don't you answer that if you want?
Yeah, I would absolutely like the government to remove this amendment and, in fact, withdraw C-21 altogether. There are other elements in the bill, such as the red and yellow flag laws, that even women's anti-violence groups are objecting to. Law enforcement objects to it. In fact, the list of who supports this legislation would be far smaller than those who oppose it. So I think at this point, it's pretty clear that they've created a huge mess. It's not appeasing anybody. It does not have a significant positive impact on public safety. And I would recommend going back to the drawing board and taking a long, hard look at what really needs to be done to make Canada a safer country.
And is there a way that the government could get a compromise that would satisfy you in any way?
Absolutely. I think if the government rerouted their focus and the resources of taxpayers and the efforts of law enforcement on the reduction of crime, violence, and gun smuggling, that would be a perfect compromise. And I think it would make Canada safer, and all Canadians would be in agreement with that.
No bill, but focus on public safety, in other words.
There are certain elements and things that they can do if they wanted to strengthen up or tighten certain things. There's been discussion on regulating the sale of magazines and certain firearm parts to avoid the manufacturing of ghost guns. I think any reasonable Canadian would not have a problem with that. But these are, of course, very tiny, unspoken elements of a piece of legislation that has now had this largest gun ban in the history of this country added as a late stage amendment. So, I mean, we're completely off the scope of the bill, and I'd love to refocus back on credible public safety measures. Thank you.
I'll go to questions online. Brian, please go ahead.
Hi there, Brian Patsy, National Post. Sorry, I can hear myself and it's throwing me off. I will try to keep myself and if I ask my question. Can you tell me the implications of the latest proposals to amend the prohibited weapons schedule, specifically firearms like the SKS, which I think, if not among, but is the most popular rifle among Canadian hunter and sport shooters? What implications does that have on hunters and sport shooters, sort of banning such a wide scope of firearms like that?
Well, one of the implications, of course, is the language around variants. So the door is open at any time for the RCMP to, upon instruction from the government, to ban everything, to ban all bolt-action rifles, all single-shot rifles, all shotguns. So that's a pretty significant implication. And as far as including the SKS, it's one of the most affordable firearms for recreational shooting and for hunting that anyone can buy. They used to go for around $150, not anymore. But I think a lot more people are affected this time around with this ban. A lot of people are waking up. A lot of people are starting to see that this is really not about public safety, because I think everyone agrees what needs to be done. Gang violence has doubled. Violent crime is up a third, all since the Liberals have taken office with their enablers, the NDP. So we need to address violence, and the gun ban is largely political. So I think we all feel the implications, and we all want to safer Canada. So we want the Liberals to refocus on what they're supposed to be doing.
Okay, a second question. You mentioned that this is largely a political exercise. I know your organization has taken part in these committee hearings, and you previously mentioned that these amendments kind of came out of left field. How can the government do better to working with the licensed firearm community?
Well, I mean, that's a pretty easy question. They can just leave us all alone. You know, it's very difficult. You can only point to a handful of times where licensed firearms owners have misbehaved, and you know, we can work on that, because I think everyone has a part to play in public safety. But we need to put the attention where it belongs, and we know where all these shootings are coming from, and we pretty much know the people that are doing it. We see these repeat offenders over and over again. We see them getting light sentences. We see them getting out on bail in the interim after they've shot up neighborhoods. Like, everyone can see what the problems are. The Liberals have to make a decision. Either they're trying to energize their base by victimizing communities that are unlikely to vote for them, or they can focus on public safety.
Next question. Stuart, please go ahead.
Hi, Stuart Benson from the Hill Times. So I not to make it sound like I'm giving the Liberals an out, but is there a level you believe with this amendment that it may be just a lack of knowledge of weapons? Because it does seem like the way it's worded, it's very expansive, as you said. And then I have a follow-up after this.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. I mean, I would like to think that they wouldn't intentionally target hunters and sport shooters. However, at this point, I can't put anything past them. We saw yesterday in SECU committee, we opened up with a Liberal MP who started picking and choosing and naming certain firearms, but they ended up being indeed added to the list. So there's absolutely a lack of knowledge and expertise in crafting these amendments and this legislation. And that's a direct result of failing to work with in unison with the firearms community and as well our industry partners.
And just as a follow-up, if the Liberals were to consult better, maybe understand these things more, would there be some guns that you believe that should be maybe banned, or do you think that that's not where it should be focused on anymore? There's no really guns that could be added to this that would be beneficial to public safety.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, either legal licensed gun owners are trusted and safe to use firearms, or they're not. And I'm of the opinion, after 175 years of experience, that absolutely we are. So I think most Canadians know, and you see it all over social media, all over the news, in columns, that the focus needs to be on reducing crime, violence, and gun smuggling, not on reducing legal gun ownership. So I'm not sure if it's an ideological difference that we're experiencing, but the cost of ignoring those things that I spoke about can be measured, and they can be measured in human lives.
I believe we have time for a few more questions in the room.
A lot of groups and victims who've had tragedies, people die in mass shootings in Canada say, look, there's no place for the Ruger Mini 14, there's no place for the AR-15 in Canada. And the government is saying, look, these guns are only designed to kill people. What do you say to that?
The Ruger Mini 14, I actually own one. It's actually called the Ruger Mini 14 Ranch Rifle, and mine is a woodstock, small caliber rifle that would normally be used for controlling varmints on a farm or ranch, and that's exactly what we used it for up in my rural property in Quebec. And I think when you look at these horrific tragedies, and I am not going to deny that these are horrible tragedies that have happened, when you reduce it down to the gun that the perpetrator used, you actually give him a free pass. And the idea that one gun is more dangerous than another it's easily refutable. The problem is some people are dangerous. And in most of these instances, we see after, the fallout after these things happen, that there's usually red flags. There was symptoms. You hear commentary from family or people who knew them, or they were visited by police. I mean, I don't understand why there's such a lack of interest in focusing on reduction. And instead, we just seem to be focusing on reaction. I mean, to ban the Mini 14 because of the Polytechnique shooting means you're saying that if he didn't have access to that gun, but instead had access to some other gun, that he wouldn't have done it. And that's completely false.
On the handgun ban and the freeze that's in effect now, there's been a push to include exemptions beyond Olympic shooters. What's your position on that issue?
Well, our position on that issue is that right now there is an exemption. There's an exemption on people who hold a restricted PAL. And the vetting and the daily monitoring and the registration of those firearms, there's more than enough regulation right now to keep those guns out of criminals' hands. So when it comes to handguns that are found at crime scenes, they're overwhelmingly sourced from the United States. And remember, criminals will source guns wherever they need to. In fact, they're starting to even make them. So if they can't get them in one area, you'll see a growth in another area. And so with all of these guns coming across the border, I mean, look at the shooting in Nova Scotia. You have an individual who had resources and means, and that individual thought, I'm not even going to waste my time going through the licensing system because it takes too much effort. I'm just going to roll down to the United States, get everything I need, right? So we have to look at the root causes of violence. We have to identify people that are a danger to society in advance. And we also need to leave licensed gun owners alone who have gone through everything in order to just to live their lives and own their property. It doesn't really make any sense when you talk about it further than a few sound bites. So.
Just quickly, the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police says we really don't know where a lot of legal guns are coming from because firearms tracing in Canada is not very complete and actually rather low in terms of percentage of guns traced from crime scenes. What do you say to that? I say that is something that we definitely need to take note of and take action on. We want to know where those guns are coming from too. Right? Because right now, it's all being laid, all the Liberals' failures on public safety is all being laid at our feet, which is, it's absurd. It wouldn't make any sense in any other conversation about anything else, motor vehicles or alcohol or tobacco, deaths. You never lay it at people who had nothing to do with those crimes at their feet, but it's okay for firearms. So we'll support additional tracing. We'll support funding for tracing. We'll support resources for tracing. Yeah, absolutely.
National data.
National data, absolutely.
And this concludes the press conference. C'est ma fin de la conférence de presse. Merci.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.